first, let me say Merry Christmas. 2 days after, and of course we had it last week, a few days before. But if Christmas occupies the proper place in your life, it's not about Black Friday. It's not about tinsels and trees and eggnog. It's not about all the hoopla, all the gifts, all the presents, all the stuff. It's about the birth of a child. Christmas is about a child that was born but grew into a man, and then that man changed the world. And when you think about what happened there, this man, this God-man, came to us from eternity. Even the prophecy that you may have received inside of a Christmas card, Micah 5 and verse 2 says, "But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me, who is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting." That's the King James. Darby's translation says, "But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, little among the thousands of Judah, out of thee he shall come forth unto me, who is to be ruler of Israel, whose goings forth are from of old, from the days of eternity." He came to us from eternity, the second person of the Godhead, and he brought us gifts. When he came into this world, he brought us gifts: forgiveness, reconciliation, freedom, justification, sanctification, a kingdom that will never end, love, peace, joy, grace. And he brought us truth. I think a lot of times we miss that part. He brought us truth. John, in his introduction to his gospel, says, "For the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ." In John the 14th chapter and verse 6, right before Jesus is to be betrayed and the next day go to the cross, he said unto him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me." And as he stood before Pilate himself, Pilate therefore said to him, "Art thou a king then?" And Jesus answered, "Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I unto the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice." Of course, Pilate then asked that famous question, "What is truth?" And he failed to recognize the fact that truth was standing right in front of him. Christmas is about a child who in reality was the second person of the Godhead, who grew into a man and changed the world as we know it because he brought us truth. Now, truth never changes. Flannery O'Connor said, "Truth does not change according to our ability to stomach it." Truth is truth. Whether we like it or whether we do not, truth cannot change. In the moment that truth changes, it ceases to be truth. If the world objects to truth, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Those things that are objectively true remain true even if the masses doubt them, deny them, oppose them, and rail against them. Truth may not be a popular position to hold when Gallup polls seem to determine the truth these days. It would seem that if 51% of the populace believes something to be true, then that something must be true. We live in a world where popular thought is embraced as truth, even though popular thought often flies in the face of truth. I remember watching an interview on Fox News, and Anne Graham Lutz was interviewed by, I forget the individual's name, but he asked a question about those who died on September 11th in the World Trade Center. And he said this: "Since you believe that you have to accept Christ to go to heaven, doesn't that mean that the Jews and the Muslims who died that day will go to hell?" Now, in interviewee school, they teach you to run away from that kind of question. But Anne didn't even flinch. She simply said, Jesus said in John 14 and verse 6, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me." Now, the interviewer wasn't satisfied with her answer, so he tried again. He said, "So you believe that you have to accept Christ to go to heaven?" And with a very composed smile, she simply replied, "That's what the Bible says." And the interviewer didn't have an answer for that one. That's what the Bible says. Now, in Matthew, the 2nd chapter, in verses 1 through 6, Matthew tells us of the mysterious story of the visit of the Magi to King Herod in Jerusalem. And the text is a familiar story. We've all sang We Three Kings, and we've all went to the Christmas pageants and seen the Christmas plays with the shepherds on the left and baby Jesus in the middle and the three nervous little boys dressed up like Oriental punk rockers on the right as wise men. And the only way you can tell they're not shepherds is because they have cone head hats. But we need to understand that represents something. Those men who came so far to find this newborn king. I don't know if you looked on the back of the bulletin, but on the back of the bulletin I included a Far Side comic that says there was actually a fourth wise man, but he was turned away because he brought a fruitcake. Matthew 2 makes it clear that the Magi found Jesus in a house in Bethlehem, meaning that they had arrived sometime after his birth, perhaps a few days, a few weeks, and some people speculate even up to a year later. But Matthew 2 is not about all the details, it's about the people. It's about people and how people received the truth, how they respond to the truth, and that's what I want to talk about this morning. Now, the first thing that we need to see is that some people seek truth. The Magi are recorded only in the book of Matthew. They show up in chapter 2 and verse 1, and they disappear forever in verse 12. And that leaves a lot of questions. Who were they? Where did they come from? How many were actually there? What was the star that guided them, and how did it lead them to Bethlehem? How long after the birth of Christ did they arrive in Jerusalem and then Bethlehem? How did they know that the baby that was going to be born would also be the King of the Jews? Because of the mystery and though many unanswered questions regarding their presence, great legends have grown up around them. The wise men have actually been given names: Caspar, Melchior, and Balthasar. They were venerated as saints, and as tradition arose, there also became a tradition of the adoration of the Magi. In fact, if you go to a cathedral in Cologne, Germany, you'll find relics there alleged to be the remains of the wise men. Matthew introduces us to the Magi. In chapter 2 of his gospel, verse 1 and verse 2, he says, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him." Now, Darby, the New American Standard, and the NIV called them Magi. The Good News Bible actually says men who studied the stars, and the Message calls them a band of scholars. Magi is a Persian word that referred to a special class of priests in the Persian Empire. They were professors and philosophers of their day, and they were brilliant, highly educated scholars of their day, trained in medicine, history, religion, prophecy, and astronomy. They were also trained in astrology. Now, astrology today has a deservedly bad rap, but in the beginning, astrology was actually connected to man's search for God. The ancients studied the skies in order to find the answers to the great questions of life. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? There's a difference between astronomy and astrology. Astronomy is the science of the study of the stars. Astrology is the belief that there is a connection between the position of those stars and human destiny. The Magi were experts in both astronomy and astrology and claimed to be able to actually divine the future. One thing's for certain: they knew that there was a king being born in Israel, and they were the brightest and highest of their age. Now, some people seek the truth. I don't know if you realize it, but the Magi probably traveled at least 1,000 miles. 1,000 miles in caravan by camel to find this child that they knew had been born. I mean, they knew he had been born, but they weren't sure where he had been born. They followed the star. They knew that a king had been born, but they did not know his name. And the picture that we have of three wise men with little cone head hats and riding 100 miles, that's actually probably far, far short of what took place here. Only large caravans would make such a journey. of 1,000 miles, because those caravans would be in danger if they were just individuals. If they were individuals traveling that far, surely along the way they would meet with thieves and those who would take all that they had. But because of their position as advisors to kings, they probably had a military escort. There may have been as many as 300 people in that caravan that traveled so far and so long to get to Jerusalem. And when they came to Jerusalem, they would have rode into Jerusalem with a great deal of pomp and circumstance, and that explains why Herod the Great was so readily quick to receive them and to meet with them. I'm sure that Jerusalem was buzzing, because here are these great wise men from the east who have came so far in order to greet a new oncoming king. Other people, not just the Magi, but other people actually sought the truth. There were the shepherds in the field, and when they were told about the birth of Christ and he would be found lying in a manger, wrapped in swaddling clothes, they immediately believed that truth and sought him out. Simeon, who would reside at the temple, who was promised that he would not die before he saw the salvation of Israel, and Anna, they all sought truth. Some people seek truth, regardless of the difficulty, regardless of the distance, regardless of the danger and the deterrence. They seek truth. They want to know. These wise men came so far because they wanted to find this great truth, this king who had been born king of Israel. Regardless of position or preparedness or even power, regardless of time, timidity, or trouble, some people seek truth. That's what they want. And regardless of age or strength or ability, some people want the truth no matter what. And what's interesting is God will always provide that truth if you truly, truly seek it. That's something that always happens. Now, that's the first group of people. Some seek the truth. But then there are those who fear the truth. Some people fear the truth. Herod the Great, in verse 3 of Matthew's Gospel in chapter 2, it says, when Herod the king heard this, that they were seeking a newborn king, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Now, at this point in time, I don't know if you know it, but Herod was very old. He was also very sick. Actually, one writer said he was nearly dead. Within 2 years, he would be. He reigned over Israel as a puppet king of Rome for 40 years. And at this time, he was a dying man teetering on an unstable throne. But he was clever. He was clever, and he was also cruel. He had many individuals killed. He had his brother-in-law killed and his mother-in-law killed because he thought they were seeking to take his throne. He had his wife killed and 2 of his sons killed because he thought they were seeking to take his throne. He was a murderer. And he killed out of power to maintain his power. Josephus, the Jewish historian that lived in that time frame, or shortly thereafter, recorded and said that Herod the Great was, quote unquote, barbaric. He was barbaric. Caesar Augustus said, and I quote, "It is safer to be Herod's sow than his son," because he had his own sons killed. He had been given the title King of the Jews by Rome itself. And I'm sure that's what set him off when it came to the wise men coming from the east to seek the King of the Jews, to worship this newborn king. It also explains why he would have the innocents slaughtered. It's no wonder that those words set him off. Why? Because he feared the truth. He feared the truth. He didn't want to hear the truth. He didn't want to hear that there was a newborn king. He was the king of Israel. No one was going to take his place. And it didn't matter that he was a breath away from death and eternity. He still didn't want to hear the truth. He feared the truth. The Jews also, many of them feared the truth. I mean, the very people that the Messiah was promised to actually rejected him, as the majority goes. In John, the first chapter, verse 10 and verse 11, in John's introduction, he says, he, speaking of Jesus, he was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. He was born a Jew. He came to his own, to the Jewish people, and his own received him not. Later in life, in John and his gospel again, in chapter 8, John records in verses 31 to 36, that Jesus has a conversation with many of the Jews who believed on him. Then said Jesus to the Jews which believed on him, "If you continue in my word, then you are my disciples indeed. and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. They answered him, We be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, you shall be made free? Jesus answered them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin, and the servant abideth not in the house forever, but the Son abideth forever. If the Son therefore shall make you free, you shall be free indeed. Now those Jews, some of them, I believe that when Jesus was talking to this crowd, there was a mixed crowd, all right? There were some who were the religious leaders, and they didn't really believe in him at all. Actually, they probably viewed him as some upstart rabbi. He didn't go to school. He wasn't educated, and yet they were envious of the crowds that were beginning to follow him. And as Jesus continues on in that address in chapter 8 of the book of John, in verses 44 through 47, he almost turns and directs what he says here to them. You are of your father, the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. And because I tell you the truth, you believe me not. Which of you convicts me of sin? If I say the truth, why do you not believe me? He that is of God heareth God's words. Ye therefore hear them not, because you are not of God. Some people fear truth. The Jews were afraid of some of the great truths that Jesus was bringing to them. And one of the truths that he was bringing to them struck at the heart of their religion. He called them hypocrites. And that just set them off. And so in order to shut him up, they plot to kill him, even though he's spoken truth to them. And had they at least been thinking from a spiritual point of view, and had they not been hypocrites, they would have said, we need to repent. But instead, they sought to silence him by killing him, and they were successful. But in doing so, they played into the very hand of God, because Christ was ordained as a lamb before the foundation of the world to be slain. The Jews were afraid of the truth. Jesus did not fit their expectations. He was politically incorrect. He didn't wear the right clothes. He hadn't studied under the right rabbis. And they rejected him, and they feared the truth. The world today still fears the truth and refuses to come to Christ. In John the 3rd chapter, in verse 16, most everybody here probably can quote it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. But that verse that's not the end of everything that Jesus said. The passage goes on in verse 17 through verse 20. Jesus says, For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He that believeth on the Son is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is condemnation, that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. In John chapter 7 and verse 7, Jesus would say, The world cannot hate you, but me it hateth, because I testify of it, that the works thereof are evil. I'm going to tell you something. I check the news pretty much on a daily basis. I check the liberal side, I check the conservative side, and I go to the BBC to get the most accurate news, because they don't care, right? And I read it every day, but I look at the things that are going on in this world. And Jesus was right. This world is full of evil. And the world is more comfortable with Gallup polls that tell them that when they do something evil, they can call it good. And when they do something good, they can call it evil. They're more comfortable with that because it fits into that which is politically acceptable, which is politically correct. The world's more comfortable with the Gallup polls than it is the truth. Some people fear the truth. The world fears the truth. Herod feared the truth. The Jews feared the truth. And some people today fear the truth. Because see, what happens is all of us have our little kingdom. We have our little world that we rule in. There are other people in our world, and there are other people in our lives, but yet we control our little world. And we want to sit on the throne of our life, and we want to decide where our life is going to go, and what our life is going to be like, and what we're going to do tomorrow, and what we're going to do next week, and what we're going to do next month, and next year, and for the rest of our life, and where we want to retire, and how much money we want in the bank. And we want to sit on our little thrones and rule our world. But yet Christ says, if you want to be my disciple, you have to deny yourself. You have to get off of that throne, and you have to get on a cross and follow me. And we don't really want that. So a lot of people today that hear the message of Christianity, that you have to die to yourself, that you have to give your life to God completely, no holds barred, you don't play footsies with him, you don't make a mockery of it, you just literally jump in, both feet, and you give it all. And they say, how much money do I have to give? How many times do I have to come? What about, hey, Wednesday night, American Idol, I got to watch the results. Some people fear truth, not just in the world of Jesus, but in the world of today. The last point, some people ignore the truth. The finest scholars in the world, they knew he was about to be born. They knew the prophecy, but thou, O Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou art little among the thousands of Judah, out of thee he shall come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting, from the days of eternity. They knew when the Messiah would be born. They knew the time frame was right. They knew the 70 weeks of Daniel had been fulfilled. It was time for the Messiah to show up. They knew that. They knew the prophecies. They knew it was time for the Messiah. Jerusalem is only 6 miles from Bethlehem. 6 miles. You could walk it in 2 to 6 hours, depending on age, endurance, fitness, whether you're fat or whether you're skinny, or whether you're old or whether you're young. You could walk it in 2 to 6 hours. I'd much rather drive, but you could walk it. And they didn't have Cadillacs back then, all right? The prophesied city where the Prince of Peace would come into the world, Bethlehem, they knew the prophecy. They knew it was time. And here come these wise men coming in this caravan from 1,000 miles away saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? And they had saw the star that had probably lingered in the sky for almost a year, if that's how long it took the wise men to get there. They were 6 miles away. 6 miles away from Jesus. 6 miles away from forgiveness, from salvation, from eternal life. 6 miles from the very thing that they had poured their scholarship into. 6 miles away, and they did not see it. There's not a single record that says any of them went to Bethlehem. The religious are often religiously indifferent. And these religious scholars are no different. They were caught up in their own little worlds. They missed the greatest moment of all history, the coming of the Son of the living God into the world, and they missed it. 300 to 350 prophecies of the Old Testament pointed toward the Messiah and his coming into the world. And all they had to do was go 6 miles. 6 miles to see it. And they wouldn't go. I've heard lots of people say, man, listen, if I'd have been there, that wouldn't have happened with me. Some people are 6 miles from a church, but they don't go. Some people have 6 Bibles in their house, but they don't read them. Some people could pray hours and hours on end, but they don't pray 6 minutes in 6 days. Because it's easier to ignore the truth. It's just easier. It doesn't change anything in your life. Nothing gets upset. The apple cart stays where it's supposed to stay. But they missed the moment of all of history. They missed it. And they were only 6 miles away. Non-Jews, Persians, rode over 1,000 miles to see this one who was born King of the Jews. And the Jews for whom that king was born would not ride 6. They called themselves God's people. But they were indifferent and apathetic to the truth. apathetic to the King himself? And if not, why not? That was the first Christmas. Some people sought the truth. Some people feared the truth. And some people ignored the truth. I pray that you and I will be a part of the first group. That it doesn't matter how hard it is or how far we have to go, how much time we have to invest, how much money we have to spend, that we will be a part of that first group, that we seek the truth. We want to know the truth, because let me tell you something. This world will come to an end. It will pass away with fervent heat, and the elements thereof shall melt. But the truth of God will last forever, and that's what you and I must follow. That first Christmas, so many people missed the glorious truth of heaven. Only a few saw it. And today, as I look around in the world, I see so many people who are missing it. Missing this glorious picture of salvation that God himself has painted with the blood of Christ so that we could be saved. And all of that is remembered at Christmas time by some, but most of it gets lost in the tinsel and the trees and the sails and the stuff. Be one that seeks truth. He brought us truth from the days of eternity. Embrace it, accept it, and obey it.